Chapter 39, Missing. The sun rose and shed light on what Roscuro and Migurisao had done, and finally Desperaux awoke, but alas, he woke too late. "I haven't seen her," Louise was shouting, "and I tell you, I wash my hands of her. If she's missing, I say good riddance. Good riddance to bad rubbish." Desperaux sat up. He looked behind him. Oh, his tail. Gone. Given over to a knife, and where tail should be, nothing but a bloody stump. "And more foul play! Gregory dead!" shouted Cook. "Poor old man, that rope of his broken by who knows what, and him lost in the dark and frightened to death because of it. It's too much." "Oh no," whispered Desperaux. "Oh no, Gregory is dead." Mouse got to his feet and began the long climb down the shelf. Once he was on the floor, he stuck his head around the door of the pantry and saw Cook standing in the center of the kitchen, wringing her fat hands. Beside her stood a tall woman, jangling a key of rings. "That's right," said Louise. "All the king's men was down there searching for him in the dungeon, and when they came back up, who do they have with them? They have the old man dead. And now you tell me that Midge is missing, and I say, who cares?" Desperaux made a small noise of despair. He'd slept too long. The rat had already acted, and the princess was gone. "What kind of world is it, Miss Louise, where princesses are taken from right under our noses, and queens drop dead, and we can't even take comfort in soup?" And with this, the cook began to cry. "Shh," said Louise. "I beg you, do not say that word." "Soup!" shouted Cook. "I will say it again, and no one can stop me. Soup, soup, soup!" And then she began to cry in earnest, wailing and sobbing. "There," said Louise. She put a hand out to touch Cook, and Cook slapped it away. "It'll be all right," said Louise. Cook brought the hem of her apron up to wipe at her tears. "No, it won't," she said. "It won't be all right ever again. They've taken our little darling away. There ain't nothing left to live for without the princess." Desperaux was amazed to have exactly what was in his heart, spoken aloud by such a ferocious, mouse-hating woman as Cook. Louise again reached out to touch Cook, and this time Cook allowed her to put a hand on her shoulder. "What would we do? What would we do?" wailed Cook. And Louise said, "Shh, there." Alas, there was no one to comfort Desperaux, and there was no time, anyway, for him to cry. He knew what he had to do. He had to find the king. For, having heard Roscuro's plan, reader, Desperaux knew that the princess was hidden in the dungeon, and being somewhat smarter than Migurisao, he sensed the terrible unspoken truth behind Roscuro's words. He knew that Midge would never be a princess, and he knew that the rat, which he captured the pea, would never let her go. And so, the small mouse who had been dipped in oil, covered in flour, and relieved of his tail, slipped out of the pantry and past the weeping ladies. He went to find the king. Chapter 40, Forgiveness. He went first to the throne room, but the king was not there, and so Desperaux slipped through a hole in the molding and was making his way to the princess's room when he came upon the mouse council, 13 mice and one very most honored head mouse, sitting around their piece of wood debating important mouse matters. Desperaux stopped and stood very still. "Fellow honored mice," said the most very honored head mouse, and then he looked up from the makeshift table and saw Desperaux. "Desperaux," he whispered. The other mice of the council leaned forward, straining to make some sense of the word that the head mouse had just uttered. "Pardon?" said one. "Excuse me," said the other. "Didn't hear it right," said the third. "I thought you said Desperaux." The head mouse gathered himself. He tried speaking again. "Fellow members," he said, "a ghost! A ghost!" And he raised a shaking paw and pointed it at Desperaux. The other mice turned and looked, and there was Desperaux Tilling, covered in flour, looking back at them, the telltale red thread still around him, his neck like the thin trail of blood. "Desperaux," said Lester, "son, you've come back." Desperaux looked at his father and saw an old mouse, whose fur was shot through with gray. How could that be? Desperaux was only gone a few days, but his father seemed to have aged many years in his absence. "Son, ghost of my son," said Lester, his whiskers trembling, "I dream about you every night. I dream about beating the drum that sent you to your death. Was wrong. What I did was wrong. No, called the very most honored head mouse. No! I've destroyed it, said Lester. I've destroyed the drum. Will you forgive me? He clasped his front paws together and looked at his son. No, shouted the head mouse again. No, do not ask the ghost to forgive you, Lester. You did as you should. You did what was best for the mouse community. Lester ignored the head mouse. Son, he said, please. Desperaux looked at his father, at his gray-streaked fur and trembling whiskers, and his front paws clasped together in front of his heart. He felt suddenly as if his own heart would break in two. His father looked so small and so sad. Forgive me, said Lester again. Forgiveness, reader, I think something very much like hope and love, is a powerful, wonderful thing. And a ridiculous thing, too. Isn't it ridiculous, after all, to think that a son could forgive his father for beating the drum that sent him to his death? Isn't it ridiculous to think that a mouse could ever forgive anyone for such perfidy? But still, here are the words Desperaux Tilling spoke to his father. He said, I forgive you, Pa. And he said those words because he sensed that it was the only way to save his own heart, to stop it from breaking in two. Desperaux, reader, spoke those words to save himself. And then he turned from his father and spoke to the whole mouse council. You were wrong, he said, all of you. You asked me to renounce my sins. I ask you to renounce yours. You wronged me. Repent. Never, said the head mouse. Desperaux stood before the mouse council and he realized that he was a different mouse than he'd been the last time he faced them. He'd been to the dungeon and back up out of it. He knew things that they would never know. What they thought of him, he realized, did not matter. Not at all. And so, without saying another word, Desperaux turned and left the room. After he was gone, the head mouse slapped his trembling paw on the table. Mice, the council, he said, we've been paid a visit by a ghost who's told us to repent. We will now take a vote. All in favor of saying that this visit did not occur, vote aye. And from the members of the mouse council there came a tiny but emphatic chorus of ayes. Only one mouse said nothing. That mouse was Despereaux's father. Lester Tilling had turned his head away from the other members of the mouse council. He was trying to hide his tears. He was crying, reader, because he'd been forgiven. And here is Desperaux and his father.